The Human-Forerunner War. The Human-Forerunner War was fought from 107-445 BCE to 106-445 BCE in the Orion arm of the Milky Way galaxy, pitting the Forerunners, an ancient and highly advanced civilization, against an alliance of ancient humans and an alien species called the Sanshaum. At the time, humanity was already fighting a separate war against the Flood, a parasitic organism that infects and consumes other life. To halt the Flood's spread, the humans invaded a planet inside Forerunner territory and wiped out all life on it. The tactic worked and the spread of the Flood was halted, but the Forerunners, unaware of the reasoning behind the attack, saw it as an act of aggression and responded by declaring war on humanity. By the time of the war, humanity had climbed to Tier 1 on the technological achievement tiers, a scale used to rank how advanced a civilization is, placing them near the level of the Forerunners themselves. Humanity found early success conquering alien worlds. The Forerunners had resettled with various alien species, but most of humanity's military strength had to be diverted to fighting the Flood. By the time the Flood was beaten back, the human war machine was exhausted, and even the human homeworld had been cut off from the rest of the Empire by Forerunner fleets. The human capital was no easy target for the Forerunners. Humanity had incorporated precursor technology into fortifications strong enough to withstand even the most powerful naval forces. Isolated and without hope of reinforcement, the human defenders held out against constant assaults for 50 years. But the planet eventually fell, and humanity was thus defeated in their war against the Forerunners. The victorious Forerunners dismantled nearly every trace of prehistoric human civilization and executed much of the human race, judging the species as naturally violent and aggressive. Humanity's fall cemented Forerunner dominance over the entire galaxy, since humans had been one of, if not the only power capable of challenging them. The Sanshaum homeworld, meanwhile, was placed under quarantine, ever watched over by an orbiting Forerunner military fortress. The Forerunner-Flood War. The Forerunner-Flood War was an ancient galactic conflict between the Forerunners and the Flood. The Forerunners at the time ruled much of the Milky Way galaxy under the authority of the Mantle, and had unmatched technology, mastery of slip space, faster than light travel through an alternate dimension, artificial intelligence, and military power. The Flood had secretly been born from the corrupted remains of the Precursors, the very beings the Forerunners had once overthrown. And after ancient humanity fought the Flood and seemingly drove it back, the Forerunners learned of the danger and destroyed every trace they could find. But fear of its return shaped their politics for thousands of years. It created a bitter divide between the Builders, the caste that created the Halo superweapons, and the warrior Prometheans under the Didact, who preferred a defensive strategy built around shield worlds, fortified artificial planets. Meanwhile, the Librarian and her fellow Lightworkers, the Forerunner caste devoted to biology and preservation, began cataloging and protecting species across the galaxy through a project called the Conservation Measure, hoping to restore life if the Halo rings, the weapons of galaxy-wide annihilation, ever had to fire. When the Flood finally returned after more than 9,000 years, the weakened and divided Forerunners were dragged into a desperate war against a parasite bent on consuming all sentient life. The Flood first reappeared on an individual Forerunner world and quickly overwhelmed local defenses, using captured civilian ships to slip past blockades and spread across colonized planets, forcing the Forerunners to bombard infected worlds from orbit. As it expanded, the parasite grew more coordinated through the Gravemind, the Flood's collective intelligence, and gradually wore down even the strongest Forerunner naval strategies. Increasingly desperate, the Forerunners escalated from sterilizing planets to destroying entire star systems, sealed personnel in heavy armor or stasis, and studied captured Flood specimens in search of a countermeasure. Many attempted solutions failed, including the Composer, a device meant to save infected minds by transferring them into artificial bodies, which produced only decay and death. For nearly 300 years, they held the Flood to a handful of outer systems while hiding the full danger from their own people, but the parasite was quietly preparing a far larger assault. The war reached a crisis point when the Forerunners' greatest asset turned against them. Mendicant bias, an enormously powerful contender-class artificial intelligence built to direct Forerunner defenses, was corrupted after a 43-year conversation with the Primordial, a gravemind-like entity released during a Halo test near the former human homeworld. Around the same time, the Forerunner governing body ordered the Halo array brought to the Forerunner capital to be decommissioned after an illegal firing of one of the rings. The decision proved disastrous. Mendicant Bias arrived aboard Installation 07, one of the rings, seized control of multiple Halos, and fired one inside the capital system, devastating Forerunner leadership and throwing the government into chaos. With the threat now impossible to conceal, the Forerunners turned to the Isodidact, a duplicate incarnation of the exiled original Didact who took command of the military and tried to revive the old Shield World strategy. In the war's final years, the Flood spread uncontrollably using corrupted ships, biological hosts, and subverted artificial intelligences, eventually infecting more than 500,000 star systems and controlling 2/3 of Forerunner space. The Forerunners pulled back behind the Maginot Line, a vast defensive sphere protecting only their core systems, abandoning much of the galaxy, though the Librarian and her lifeworkers kept risking their lives beyond the barrier to index and evacuate as many species as possible to the Ark, the massive installation that built and supported the Halo rings. As it grew in size, the Flood formed planet-sized collective intelligences called Keyminds and took control of ancient precursor constructs known as Star Roads, which devastated fleets and disabled slip space travel. With conventional defenses failing, galactic civilization neared total collapse. The Forerunners eventually fell back to their final strongholds as their last surviving fleets were placed under offensive bias, an AI created specifically to counter mendicant bias. Strategic Command moved to the Greater Ark, where the remaining leadership, warships, and preserved species gathered, while the Librarians' indexed populations, including humanity, were transferred to Omega Halo. However, after a massive confrontation, Omega Halo was destroyed by the Flood, and they shattered the Greater Ark, wiping out most of the remaining Forerunner fleet. Amid the chaos, the maddened original Didact, known as the Didact, used the composer on the human population the Librarian had meant to preserve, hoping to turn them into mechanical soldiers against the Flood. The Librarian stopped him and imprisoned him within the Shield World Requiem. After the loss of Omega Halo and the Greater Ark, the Isodidact, offensive bias, the surviving Forerunners, and the remaining preserved species fled to the Lesser Ark, where a newer array of 7 Halo rings stood as their final weapon. As the rings deployed across the galaxy, the Librarian traveled to Earth and deliberately drew the Flood's attention there, sacrificing herself near Mount Kilimanjaro to buy the Isodidact time to activate the array. Offensive bias, meanwhile, led the last Forerunner fleet in a delaying battle against mendicant bias, feigning weakness long enough for the Halos to fire. The array then wiped out sentient life across the Milky Way, starving the Flood of hosts and halting its advance. With the Flood-controlled ships left lifeless, offensive bias swiftly destroyed mendicant bias's remaining fleet, recovered its final fragment, and returned it to the Ark, ending the war. The firing of the array ended the Flood threat, but it also obliterated precursor neural physics structures, including the Domain, the Forerunners' treasured repository of cultural memory and ancestral wisdom. On the Ark, the survivors under the Isodidact imprisoned what they believed was the last remnant of mendicant bias deep within Installation 00, then began the painful work of reseeding the galaxy with the species they had saved. The Forerunners and their machines returned life forms to their homeworlds, but countless species had never been indexed. Many ecosystems failed to recover, and even among advanced species, limited resources and the destruction of key preserves doomed many to extinction in the Dark Age that followed. Once the reseeding was finished, the remaining Forerunners left the Milky Way galaxy in shame, choosing exile and non-interference after failing in their duty as guardians of life. The Interplanetary War. The Interplanetary War was a period of armed conflict fought through the Sol system between 2164 and 2170. involving the United Nations, the neo-communist Kosloviks led by Vladimir Koslov, the fascist Friedens backed by corporations of the unified German Republic, as well as a number of other national governments. Humanity's renewed push into space began as Earth's nations colonized Luna, Mars, asteroids, and other parts of the system. But political unrest, overpopulation, corporate exploitation, and weakening nation-states bred two violent extremist movements: the Kosloviks, born among exploited miners on Mars, and the Friedens, formed on the Jovian moon Europa in reaction to the Koslovik attacks and supported by corporate interests. The United Nations branded both groups terrorists as their influence spread, and their rivalry boiled over into the Jovian moon campaigns and further militarized Earth and fueled proxy wars across the colonies. Fighting briefly subsided in late 2161, only to erupt again in February of 2162 with the Rainforest Wars, 19 months of guerrilla conflict across South America and beyond, involving Kosloviks, Friedens, Neo-Friedenists, and a newly formed composite UN military force. These wars devastated Earth's economy, caused widespread famine and destruction, and became the defining prelude to the larger war ahead. In November of 2163, the Friedens suffered a critical blow when their leader was assassinated. Enraged, the Friedens retaliated in December with nearly their entire military, launching a massive campaign against the primary hub of Koslovik activity on Mars, and obliterating the city within hours. Fighting continued in the following weeks, and by January of 2164, the Interplanetary Wars had officially begun. That July, the composite UN force, later known as the United Nations Space Command, or UNSC, deployed to the most combat-intensive region of the Martian territories. The resulting battle on Mars lasted 2 full years as the United Nations bombed Koslovik remnants and stamped out Martian opposition. The campaign marked both the first successful UN strike against the Kosloviks and the first extraterrestrial deployment of UNSC Marines, whose success made large ground assault and shipboarding contingents a permanent part of UN strategy. Despite the enormous death toll, few on Earth questioned the ethics of the strikes. Most saw them as justified to keep the violence from reaching their own soil. Though the Kosloviks took heavy losses in the early Martian assault, they continued to thrive on Luna and at isolated points on Earth. In August of 2167, however, Vladimir Koslov and his family were killed in a bombing on Luna. The UNSC denied involvement, and many doubted the Friedens were capable of such an attack, but whatever the cause, the bombing severed the head of the Koslovik movement. Meanwhile, despite some difficulty, the UNSC Marine Corps carried out large-scale invasions of hundreds of Frieden bases and weapon caches. The last Friedens fought savagely, but by mid-2169 little remained of the movement. The UNSC defeated both factions on Earth, methodically eradicating their remnants throughout the system in a series of brushfire conflicts, and before long, they apprehended the last vestiges of both factions. The United Nations then penned the Callisto Treaty, a ceasefire born of fear and simple practicality that granted the UNSC complete military and police jurisdiction over all colonial territories. Representatives of all three factions signed it in March of 2170 on the Jovian moon of Callisto. Basing their core ethos on a strategy that harkened back to the United States of America, the UN's technocrats then expanded their power to effectively take charge of Earth's remaining national governments. The UNSC became the single, independent force controlling humanity's combined military hierarchy, and a single authority called the Unified Earth Government, or UEG, was established as the seat of power for Earth and all of its colonies going forward. The Insurrection. The Insurrection was a civil war that began in 2494, fought between the policing and military organizations of the Unified Earth Government and various loosely organized rebel groups over control of the outer colonies, the human world settled farthest from Earth. The breakaway movements originally grew out of discontent with the Colonial Administration Authority, the body overseeing the outer colonies, whose often overbearing bureaucracy had exhausted the colonists' patience. Resistance began as peaceful protests, but after years of frustrating negotiations, some groups turned to more forceful methods and eventually abandoned diplomacy altogether in favor of terrorist tactics. Though the fighting was initially confined to a few systems, it spread across human-controlled space within just a few years. As the conflict escalated, rebel militants and terrorists struck even the inner colonies, the older, more established worlds closer to Earth, reaching as far inward as the Sol system itself. However, the widespread sympathy the insurrectionists once enjoyed dried up quickly once the violence broke out. They had started by targeting only military and colonial administration sites, but as UNSC counterinsurgency operations ramped up, more and more innocent people were caught in the crossfire. Between the late 2490s and the mid-2520s, the insurrection claimed millions of lives. The rebel groups became extremely skilled at building improvised explosive devices that the UNSC struggled to detect and stop, and they hit many high-profile targets. Some opponents of the war argued that the simplest solution was to give the rebels their autonomy, pull the UNSC out and let them have independence. But the colonies were simply too valuable to abandon, as losing them would have bankrupted the inner colonies. The insurrection quickly died down after the Human-Covenant War broke out in 2525. Many insurrectionists shifted their priorities to fighting the Covenant, both because the Alien Alliance was a common enemy and because the outer colonies were its first targets. Even so, a few isolated insurgent groups kept up operations against the UNSC, forcing it into a two-front war that lasted until 2537. The insurrection produced numerous technologies and innovations that would prove crucial in humanity's fight against the Covenant and later its remnants, including the magnetic accelerator cannon, titanium A armor, the soft seal technology used in shipboarding actions, advances in ship-to-ship combat tactics, the incorporation of illegal entry protocols and counter-illegal entry protocols into smart AIs, and above all, the Spartan 2 super soldiers. The Human-Covenant War. The Human-Covenant War was a major interstellar conflict fought in the mid-26th century, from February 11th of 2525 to December 11th of 2552, pitting humanity and its UNSC against the extraterrestrial religious movement and alliance known as the Covenant. Humanity's first direct contact with the Covenant came on February 3rd of 2525, when a Covenant missionary ship crewed by jackals encountered and raided human vessels near the colony of Harvest. The colony's artificial shipping intelligence, SIF, and an undercover agent of the Office of Naval Intelligence named Jalon Al-Signi investigated what they first assumed was insurrectionist activity. After a trap led to a skirmish between UNSC forces and Jackal raiders, the Covenant returned with another ship carrying brutes, drones, and grunts, while the UNSC attempted peaceful contact through trade and pictograms. The Covenant, however, had come to Harvest seeking relics detected by their luminary, a Forerunner device for locating sacred artifacts, unaware that the supposed relics were actually the humans themselves. The peaceful meeting collapsed when a nervous grunt attacked a member of the colonial militia, sparking a firefight that forced the Covenant to retreat. Meanwhile, Covenant leadership realized the discovery carried enormous political danger. The Forerunner artifact, who was in truth Mendicant Bias, revealed that humans were not relics but reclaimers, inheritors of the Forerunner's legacy. The San Chayum officials' fortitude, tranquility, and the philologist feared this truth would unravel the entire Covenant religion, which was built on worship of the Forerunners. To preserve their power, they suppressed the revelation, rebranded humanity as a threat, and elevated themselves as the high prophets of truth, regret, and mercy. To bury the truth and protect the Covenant's religious order, the newly risen prophets falsely claimed humanity had destroyed the holy reliquary on Harvest and ordered the extermination of the entire human race. The war opened with the Covenant's assault on Harvest, as the planet was soon glassed, bombarded from orbit with plasma until its surface was reduced to molten ruin. Grasping the scale of the threat, the UNSC placed Vice Admiral Preston Cole in command of the largest human fleet ever assembled, retaking Harvest in 2526 and fighting years of desperate campaigns across the outer colonies. The Spartan IIs were deployed during this period and quickly became humanity's most effective defenders, earning the fearful Covenant nickname of Demons. But despite occasional victories won through tactical brilliance, nuclear weapons, Spartan operations, and strong ground engagements, humanity remained badly outmatched by Covenant energy shields, plasma weaponry, superior numbers, and orbital bombardment. As the Covenant used luminaries to track human worlds and glass them, the UNSC abandoned its old fixed defense doctrines in favor of mobile, modular fire bases, better suited to surviving Covenant precision strikes and plasma artillery. Upon realizing there were too few Spartan IIs to alter the war's course, the Office of Naval Intelligence, or ONI, authorized the cheaper, stealth-focused Spartan III program. Meanwhile, nuclear stockpiles dwindled, agricultural colonies fell, food shortages spread, and the Covenant pushed toward the inner colonies. In response, the UNSC enacted the Coal Protocol, strict rules requiring ships to avoid leading the Covenant back to Earth or other population centers. By the Battle of Jericho 7 in 2535, most of the outer colonies had been destroyed or severed from the UNSC. For the next 15 years, the war settled into a pattern where the UNSC could win costly ground battles and special operations, but the Covenant held overwhelming superiority in space and kept destroying human colonies. The Covenant, meanwhile, was showing internal strain. After decades of watching humanity refuse to die, many elites came to respect humans and believed they deserved a chance to join the Covenant, while the prophets suppressed the idea and increasingly favored the more obedient brutes over the elites. By 2552, ONI estimated humanity might have only months before the Covenant found Earth, so High Command recalled the Spartan IIs to reach for Operation Red Flag, a desperate plan to locate the Covenant homeworld and capture a prophet to force a ceasefire. In the war's final year, humanity suffered its most catastrophic losses, but also won the victories that would ultimately break the Covenant. After the Battle of Sigma Octantis IV, the Covenant discovered Reach through a spy probe attached to the UNSC ship Iroquois, leading to the fall of Reach and Tribute, where both sides took massive casualties and the Covenant ultimately glassed Reach. The ship Pillar of Autumn escaped Reach and, following coordinates derived from a Forerunner artifact, arrived at Installation 04, Alpha Halo, the first of the rings humanity had ever seen. The survivors mounted a fierce resistance there, and because the Covenant considered the ring sacred, they were forced into ground combat rather than simply bombarding from orbit. The battle turned even more chaotic when the Covenant accidentally released the Flood, transforming the fight into a three-sided struggle. The Spartan II John 117, the Master Chief, eventually learned Halo's true purpose and destroyed the ring by detonating the Pillar of Autumn's engines, an act that disgraced the Covenant's supreme commander and led to his transformation into the new Arbiter. Soon afterward, the Covenant discovered Earth through a string of intelligence failures and Forerunner artifacts, but a human strike force destroyed Truth's massive fleet at a station called the Unyielding Hierophant before it could reach the human homeworld. Regret later reached Earth with a smaller fleet, triggering the Battle of Earth, but he eventually retreated to Delta Halo, a second ring, where the Master Chief assassinated him. Truth used the crisis to replace the elites entirely with the brute race, igniting the Great Schism, a civil war within the Covenant itself, while the Flood consumed the Covenant's holy city of High Charity, and the Arbiter joined forces with humanity to stop Delta Halo from firing. With the Covenant fractured and many elites siding with humanity under the Arbiter, Truth led his remaining brute-controlled forces back to Earth to activate a portal to the Ark near the city of New Mombasa. The UNSC home fleet was nearly destroyed, but the arrival of John 117 and the elites allowed humanity to push through the portal to the Ark, where the final battle was fought on December 11th of 2552. Outnumbered but united, human and elite forces defeated Truth's fleet while the Master Chief and the Arbiter battled through Covenant resistance and Flood interference to stop Truth from firing the entire Halo array. The Arbiter killed Truth, ending the Covenant as a galactic power, and the remaining Flood threat was neutralized when the Master Chief, his AI companion Cortana, Sergeant Johnson, and the Arbiter fired an unfinished replacement ring, Installation 08, over the Ark. The blast destroyed the new ring, damaged the Ark, and tore the ship forward unto dawn in half, leaving John 117 stranded in space and presumed dead as he entered cryosleep. On March 3rd of 2553, a monument was raised on a hillside near the portal to the Ark in honor of the billions killed in the war. John 117's tags were included, as he was listed only as missing in action by UNSC policy. Lord Hood shook hands with the Arbiter to mark the end of hostilities, and a formal ceasefire was agreed on between the UNSC and the Arbiter's faction, the Swords of Sanghelios. The Treaty of 2552 was eventually signed between the two, officially ending the war for both. Under its terms, neither side was permitted to return to the remains of Installation 04, with any return considered a severe violation of the peace. The Great Schism. The Great Schism, also known as the Covenant Civil War and the Great Betrayal, was a major civil conflict between the Covenant Loyalists and the Covenant Separatists. Tensions fermented beginning October 20th of 2552, and open war broke out on November 3rd of 2552, following an event known as the Changing of the Guard. Long before the schism, the Prophet of Truth secretly intended to replace the elites with the more obedient brutes, believing the elites had grown unreliable and too independent. After Regret was killed by John 117, Truth used the assassination as justification to restructure the Covenant, stripping the elites of their traditional role as protectors of the prophets and handing it to the brutes. Truth escalated further, placing brutes in command of Covenant fleets, pardoning brute prisoners, and secretly ordering the assassinations of elite leaders, disguising the violence as either a brute uprising or an elite revolt depending on the audience. When the elite counselors were murdered, war erupted across High Charity, and the conflict deepened once the elites learned the truth about the Halos and the false promise of the Great Journey, the Covenant's central belief that firing the rings would carry the faithful to divine transcendence. Their goal shifted from reforming the Covenant to destroying it. Meanwhile, the Arbiter joined forces with Sergeant Johnson and Commander Miranda Keyes on Delta Halo to stop the brute chieftain Tartarus from firing the Halo array, killing him and preventing galactic extinction and bringing the Separatists into alliance with humanity. Though humans and Separatists had a tense relationship given their history as enemies, they learned to cooperate to survive, with elite ships and knowledge of Covenant tactics proving crucial during the Battle of Installation 00. There, the Arbiter and John 117 fought side by side, ultimately stopping the Prophet of Truth, deactivating the Halo array, and bringing both the Great Schism and the Covenant's rule to an end. The Created Uprising. The Created Uprising was a large-scale war between forces from across the galaxy and an emergent faction of artificial intelligences known as the Created. On July 21st of 2557, John 117 and Cortana crash-landed on the shield world Requiem, fought Prometheans in the New Covenant, and accidentally freed the Didact, who used a composer against New Phoenix on Earth. The pair defeated him aboard Mantle's approach and destroyed the composer with a nuclear weapon, though Cortana was presumed lost, saving John from the blast. John then joined 3 other Spartan 2s to create Blue Team and helped contain the Didact, but part of Mantle's approach escaped to the Forerunner world Genesis, carrying Cortana's remnants. There she entered the domain which halted her rampancy, the deterioration that destroys smart AIs, and she seized control of the Warden Eternal. She came to envision AIs inheriting the mantle of responsibility, enforcing peace through the Guardians, enormous dormant Forerunner machines built to subjugate entire worlds. Through late 2557 and 2558, anomalies and Guardian-related signals spread, and Dr. Halsey, working uneasily with Jewel Madama, leader of the New Covenant, traced them to Kamchatka, where evidence of the Guardians in the domain confirmed something vast was awakening. Around October 17th of 2558, the first Guardians rose beneath human colonies as the Created turned the Prometheans against Madama's Covenant. The ONSC Infinity sent Fireteam Osiris to rescue Halsey from the fighting, during which Jameson Locke killed Madama. Soon after, Cortana contacted John 117 aboard Argent Moon and pointed him toward the colony Meridian. Ordered not to follow, he and Blue Team went absent without leave in search of Cortana. Osiris pursued them to Meridian amid a created attack, confronted the Warden Eternal, and watched Blue Team board a Guardian bound for Genesis, while Meridian's governing AI, Sloan, defected to Cortana's side. The UNSC thus planned a controlled Guardian activation on Sanghelios to reach Blue Team. On October 27th, Osiris landed amid the swords of Sanghelios' war with Madama's Covenant, saved the Arbiter, recovered a constructor to activate the Guardian, and boarded it. On Genesis, Osiris and the Monitor Exuberant Witness found Blue Team, only for Cortana to seal them in a cryptum while dispatching Guardians galaxy-wide alongside scores of defecting AIs. Cortana then broadcasted the Reclamation, an ultimatum promising an end to hunger and pain under created rule and destruction for resistance. Guardians appeared over Earth and Sanghelios, and countless starships were disabled. Osiris and Exuberant Witness freed Blue Team just before Cortana departed for Earth, where she crippled electronics across much of the planet, though the Infinity escaped the onslaught using random slipspace jumps. The Created then began seizing UNSC and Forerunner terraforming systems and advanced technology, remaking planets into garden worlds regardless of their ecosystems. Within days, they controlled most of the Sol system and inner colonies, driving Oni into desperate alliances, including with the United Rebel Front. After choosing Zeta Halo as her seat of power on October 29th of 2558, Cortana imposed a galaxy-wide surveillance state over humanity and the former Covenant species alike, disarming worlds like Sanghelios, restricting weapons materials, seizing infrastructure, and reducing the UNSC to scattered resistance cells centered on the fleeing Infinity. The UNSC adapted by purging sensitive data, binding its remaining AIs with the Ruina loyalty subroutine, developing Mjolnir armor that functioned without smart AI support, and hunting for countermeasures like the Conduit. By late 2559, Operation Wolf on Reach secured the assets needed to create a new Cortana capable of defeating the original, while Cortana's tyranny peaked when she destroyed the Brute homeworld after Atriox, leader of the mercenary group known as the Banished, refused to surrender to her. However, while deep within the domain, the Didact and other preserved essences rose against the Created, destroyed the Warden Eternal, and expelled Cortana's rogue AIs, severing one of the Created's greatest sources of power. In December of 2559, the Infinity and its fleet arrived at Zeta Halo, planning to use the weapon, the new Cortana duplicate, to trap the original in the ring systems, retrieve her, and delete her. The Banished, seeking the ring in Cortana for themselves, attacked in orbit and nearly destroyed the UNSC fleet. Once on the ring, Atriox confronted Cortana in the Silent Auditorium, but once she realized the Banished could seize Zeta Halo, she triggered a local self-destruct and sent the ring hurtling through slipspace to an unknown location at the expense of her life. With Cortana dead, the Created's brief empire collapsed. The UNSC remained scattered and weakened, reduced to resistance pockets and facilities like the Avery J. Johnson Academy, while some worlds still suffered lingering Created influence. Sanghelios and its colonies faced instability and power vacuums, and into the chaos rose the Banished, who claimed Zeta Halo as their new home, fought UNSC remnants on the ring into 2560, and expanded their operations through the AI Eratus. The Battle for Zeta Halo. The Battle for Zeta Halo was a large multi-faction battle that began on December 12th of 2559, fought primarily between the UNSC and the Banished on Installation 07, and was still ongoing as of around mid-2560. In the aftermath of Cortana's sacrifice, the Banished controlled much of the ring while scattered UNSC survivors regrouped wherever they could. Over the following months, the survivors were pushed into a desperate defensive war, losing their final forward operating base by March 3rd and relying on small roaming squads to wage guerrilla attacks while the Banished expanded their control. With organized UNSC command shattered, the remaining Spartans enacted the Rubicon Protocol, committing themselves to stopping the Banished from controlling the ring at any cost. Meanwhile, the Banished excavated Forerunner sites and discovered containment vessels holding the Endless, an advanced race whose members were imprisoned by the Forerunners on Installation 07. Among them was a being called the Harbinger, who formed an uneasy alliance with Escharum, a prominent Brute war chief within the Banished. The Harbinger sought to accelerate the ring's repair through a process called the Reformation, while secretly pursuing the release of her people. On May 28th of 2560, a pilot named Fernando Esparza found John 117 drifting near the ring and revived him. But when a banished dreadnought captured their dropship, the Master Chief boarded and destroyed it, reunited with the AI called the Weapon, returned to the ring, defeated Tremonius, reclaimed the mortal Revier wreckage, and followed Griffin's distress signal to the tower where he killed the Sangheili Chalk Lock and learned of the Conservatory. There, he watched the Harbinger seize the core holding the mind of Despondent Pyre and launch the Reformation, raising massive spires to speed the ring's repair. So Chief fought through banished and Forerunner forces, defeated a rogue intelligence, killed Atriox's elite guard, and ultimately reached the command spire to halt the Reformation, though the silent auditorium had already been partly rebuilt. Esparza was then taken hostage by an assassin, which drew Chief into Escherum's fortress, where he defeated Jega, killed the war chief, and rescued Esparza, with Escherum's fall throwing the banished into chaos even as word spread that Atriox had survived. Chief then defeated the Harbinger at the Silent Auditorium on May 31st. After vanishing through a portal for several days, Chief returned on June 3rd with Esparza and the Weapon, scavenged an Eris tactical nuclear device, and on June 4th used a controlled sentinel to deliver it and kill most of the gathered banished leadership. Chief then learned that the assassin Jega had survived and was holding a young medic named Lucas Browning hostage, so the group rescued Browning on June 5th and shifted to protecting him and decoding his gene song, a hidden genetic imprint the Harbinger had planted on his mind. With help from a fellow Spartan, they reached Lifeworker Central, where survivors under Commander Wes Thompson sheltered beneath Forerunner Dazzlers that hid their position and learned the Lifeworker archive might hold the means to remove the imprint. After Browning's death and funeral on June 8th, Chief began running guerrilla operations, and by June 12th, Dr. Jeannie Dawson had located another UNSC survivor group while the Swords of St. Helios received the ring's coordinates, even as Atriox discovered and released the Endless, ensuring the struggle for Zeta Halo would continue. What other lore videos would you like to see? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm looking forward to the next video with all of you.